The old church on the outskirts of town had stood for centuries, its stone walls weathered by time and nature. But the real mystery lay in the graveyard behind it, a place whispered about in hushed tones by the townspeople. Legend had it that once the sun dipped below the horizon, the graveyard became a place where the dead didn't rest. It all began with a stormy night. A bolt of lightning struck the church's steeple, sending a shiver through the town. The next morning, a strange symbol was found scorched into the ground by the largest tombstone, one belonging to a man who had been buried centuries ago. No one knew what it meant, but the town's older generation looked on with fear in their eyes. Emma, a college student studying local history, had always been fascinated by the old church. When she heard about the strange occurrence, she couldn't resist investigating. Armed with a flashlight and her camera, she ventured into the graveyard after dark, her curiosity overpowering her fear. As she wandered between the ancient tombstones, a chilling wind began to howl through the trees. The night was eerily quiet, save for the distant sound of the church bell, which hadn't rung in years. Emma's flashlight flickered, and she caught a glimpse of something moving between the graves, a shadowy figure, impossibly tall and thin. Heart-pounding, she aimed her camera towards the figure, but it vanished before she could capture it. The only thing left was the feeling that she wasn't alone. Emma's experience left her shaken, but also more determined to uncover the truth. She returned to the graveyard the next night, this time with her friend Tom. They walked the perimeter of the graveyard, examining the symbols on the tombstones, many of which seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. As they approached the largest tombstone, the one struck by lightning, they noticed something disturbing, a pair of red eyes watching them from the darkness. The eyes blinked, and then the figure stepped forward, revealing a ghostly apparition dressed in tattered priest robes, its face obscured by a dark hood. Tom's instinct was to run, but Emma held her ground. The figure raised its hand, pointing towards the church. The air grew colder, and whispers filled the night, whispers that seemed to be coming from the very ground beneath them. The whispers were not random, they were chanting, repeating the same words over and over in a language Emma couldn't understand. She felt drawn to the church, as if the ghostly figure was compelling her to follow. Tom, too frightened to resist, trailed behind her. Inside the church, the air was thick with dust and decay. The pews were covered in cobwebs, and the altar was cracked, but what caught their attention was the ancient book lying open on the altar, its pages yellow with age. The text was in Latin, but Emma could make out one phrase: "The dead shall walk with the living." Suddenly, the church doors slammed shut, and the temperature dropped even further. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and a low growl echoed from the graveyard. The chant outside grew louder, more insistent, as if summoning something from the depths. Emma and Tom tried to leave the church, but the doors wouldn't budge. It was as if they were trapped in some kind of dark ritual. The book on the altar began to glow, and the floorboards creaked as if something or someone was moving beneath them. Without warning, the graves outside started to open, one by one. Skeletal hands clawed their way out of the earth, followed by rotting bodies, their hollow eyes filled with an unnatural light. The dead were rising, and they were not at peace. In the distance, they heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the church. The ghostly priest appeared again, this time inside the church, standing by the altar. He gestured for them to approach, his voice echoing in their minds. The sin must be atoned for. Emma managed to translate some of the Latin text from the ancient book, uncovering a terrible secret. The church had once been the site of a dark ritual, performed by a priest who had turned to black magic. The ritual was meant to grant eternal life, but instead, it had cursed the land, binding the spirits of the dead to the graveyard. The priest had been buried alive as punishment, his spirit trapped in the graveyard to watch over the souls he had condemned. But the curse was growing stronger, the dead more restless, and the priest's power was returning. Emma realized that the only way to break the curse was to find the object that had been used in the original ritual, a cursed relic buried somewhere in the graveyard. But time was running out, and the dead were closing in. With the help of Tom, Emma began searching the graveyard for clues. They knew the relic had to be buried in a specific grave, but which one? The ghostly priest followed them, watching their every move. The chants grew louder, the ground more unstable, as if the graveyard itself was rebelling against their presence. They found several old, crumbling tombstones with strange symbols etched into them, similar to the ones scorched into the earth. Each symbol represented a different aspect of the ritual, but none pointed directly to the relic. As they searched, they could feel the presence of the dead growing stronger. Cold fingers brushed against their skin, ghostly whispers filled their ears, and shadowy figures darted in and out of their vision. After hours of searching, they finally found a small, unmarked grave hidden beneath a large oak tree. The soil was loose, as if someone had recently disturbed it. With trembling hands, Emma dug into the earth, uncovering a small, ancient box. The box was sealed with wax, and the moment she touched it, the ground around them erupted in a chorus of tormented screams. The dead were angry, their spirits swirling around them in a frenzy. Emma knew she had to open the box, but she feared what it might contain. With Tom's help, she broke the seal and lifted the lid. Inside was a small, black stone, pulsating with a dark energy. This was the relic, a fragment of the priest's power, the key to the curse. As soon as the box was opened, the graveyard erupted in chaos. The dead began to rise in greater numbers, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They were no longer just spirits, they were something more, something darker. Emma and Tom ran towards the church, the relic in hand, but the dead were relentless, closing in from all sides. The ghostly priest reappeared, this time more solid, more real, his eyes burning with anger. "You cannot stop what has been set in motion," he hissed, his voice echoing in the night. "The dead shall rise, and the living shall fall." Emma clutched the relic, feeling its power surge through her. She knew they had to destroy it, but how? The priest's power was growing, and the dead were closing in, their skeletal hands reaching out to drag them into the earth. Inside the church, Emma and Tom barricaded the doors, but it wouldn't hold for long. The dead were pounding against the walls, their moans filling the air. The priest stood at the altar, his eyes fixed on the relic. "You think you can break the curse?" he sneered. "You are delayed. The dead are mine, and soon you will be too." Emma refused to give up. She placed the relic on the altar, determined to find a way to destroy it. But the priest's power was overwhelming, and the air grew thick with darkness. Suddenly, Tom remembered something, an old legend about a sacred blade hidden within the church, capable of vanquishing evil. They searched frantically, and in a hidden compartment beneath the altar, they found a rusted, ancient sword, glowing faintly with a holy light. With the sword in hand, Emma felt a surge of hope. The priest's eyes widened in fear as she raised the blade, its light cutting through the darkness. The relic began to tremble, as if sensing its impending doom. The dead outside grew more frantic, their attacks more violent. The walls of the church began to crack, the roof threatening to collapse. Emma knew she had only one chance. She had to strike at the heart of the curse. With a final, desperate effort, she brought the sword down on the relic. The moment the blade touched the stone, a blinding light filled the church, and the relic shattered into 1,000 pieces. The shattering of the relic unleashed a powerful shockwave, sending Emma and Tom flying across the church. The walls began to crumble, the ground beneath them shaking violently. The dead outside let out a collective scream, their bodies disintegrating into dust. The shattering of the relic unleashed a powerful shockwave, sending Emma and Tom flying across the church. The walls began to crumble, the ground beneath them shaking violently. The dead outside let out a collective scream, their bodies disintegrating into dust. The church began to collapse around them, and Emma and Tom scrambled to escape. The priest's laughter echoed in their minds as the roof caved in, burying the altar beneath a mountain of rubble. Emma and Tom barely made it out of the church before it collapsed completely. The graveyard was silent now, the dead finally at rest. But the air was still thick with a sense of unease, as if the curse had not been fully broken. They stood in the ruins of the church, catching their breath, but their victory felt hollow. The priest's warning echoed in Emma's mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't seen the last of him. As they walked away from the graveyard, the first light of dawn began to break through the clouds. But the shadows seemed longer, the air colder, as if the curse was still lingering, waiting for its next opportunity. Back in town, Emma and Tom tried to return to their normal lives, but the events of the graveyard haunted them. They began to notice strange things, a shadowy figure watching them from a distance, whispers in the night, and cold spots in their homes. They decided to dig deeper into the town's history, hoping to find a way to end the curse for good. What they uncovered shocked them. The entire town was built on cursed land, the result of the priest's original ritual. The curse wasn't just limited to the graveyard. It had seeped into the very foundation of the town. As they delved deeper, they realized that the priest had followers, people who had helped him perform the ritual. Their descendants still lived in the town, and some were still loyal to the priest's dark cause. Emma and Tom began to notice that some of the townspeople were acting strangely. They seemed to be watching them, following their every move. It became clear that the priest's followers were still active, working to bring him back to full power. One night, Emma was confronted by one of the loyalists, an old woman with piercing eyes. "You should have left well enough alone," she hissed. "The priest's work is not finished. You cannot stop what is coming." Emma realized that the loyalists were planning something, a ritual to restore the priest's power. They needed to stop it, but they didn't know when or where it would happen. Emma and Tom spent the next few days trying to track down the loyalists, but they were always one step ahead. The town seemed to be under a dark cloud, the air thick with tension. Everyone was on edge, as if sensing that something terrible was about to happen. Then, one night, they saw at a gathering of people in the graveyard, hooded figures surrounding the ruins of the church. They were chanting, their voices low and ominous, as they performed a dark ritual. Emma and Tom knew they had to act fast. They rushed to the graveyard, but the loyalists were ready for them. They were surrounded, outnumbered, with no way to stop the ritual. The loyalists began the ritual, chanting in a language Emma couldn't understand. The ground began to shake, and the air grew cold as the priest's spirit was summoned back to the graveyard. His form appeared, more solid than before, his eyes burning with a malevolent light. Emma and Tom tried to fight their way through the loyalists, but they were too strong. The priest's power was growing, and it was clear that he would soon be fully restored. Desperate, Emma remembered the sacred blade they had found in the church. She had brought it with her, hoping it might still have some power left. With a final, desperate effort, she raised the blade and charged at the priest. The blade glowed with a holy light as Emma struck at the priest. He let out a terrible scream as the blade cut through his form, the light burning away his dark power. The loyalists tried to stop her, but Tom held them off, giving Emma the chance to deliver the final blow. The priest's form began to disintegrate, his power draining away as the blade pierced his heart. The ground shook violently, and the loyalists fell to their knees, their connection to the priest severed. With a final, agonizing scream, the priest's spirit was banished, his form dissolving into nothing. The graveyard fell silent, the air cleared for the first time in centuries. As the sun rose over the graveyard, the dark cloud that had hung over the town began to lift. The curse was finally broken, the dead at peace, and the loyalists powerless. Emma and Tom stood in the ruins of the church, exhausted but victorious. But the victory came at a cost. The town had been forever changed by the curse, and many of its secrets would remain buried in the past. Emma and Tom knew they couldn't stay. They had to leave the town behind and start fresh, away from the darkness that had haunted them. Emma and Tom left the town, vowing never to return. They knew that the curse was broken, but the memories of what had happened would stay with them forever. They found a new place to live, far from the town and its dark history, hoping to build a new life. But even as they settled into their new home, there was a lingering sense of unease, a feeling that the darkness wasn't entirely gone. The shadows seemed longer, the nights colder, as if the priest's curse had left a permanent mark on their souls. And in the quiet of the night, when the wind howled through the trees, they could still hear the faint whisper of the dead, reminding them that some things can never truly be buried.